well, after the blues of Edgar and the hyperbole of Tim, I mean, what can we say? I think it's a very simple way to start, which really is from where you've just mentioned, is one of optimism. Because if I look across the room and I see the 20, 30 individuals who've gone through this experience, there can only be cause for optimism. Because you've created, all of you in the front rows here, a new generation of city makers. And that's what I want to talk about. So, my first slide is, can you all stand up? And can we congratulate them? Thank you. There'll be more of that clapping in a moment. But what I wanted to do in my talk here is really connect some of the bigger issues we've been talking about. Edgar raised the urgency of what is happening at the moment and the need for a new way of thinking of the profession. I want to link that a little bit to also some of the personal sides that have already been mentioned. Not because I want to talk about Norman or me or anyone else, but because this is exactly what you guys and girls are going to be doing in the next 20 years of your life, if not more. And I'm nearly joking with this slide. It all started here, Norman, didn't it? For those of you who don't know it, this is Trafalgar Square as it used to be, the center of London. It was a traffic roundabout, right? It was horrible. You couldn't cross the road. And Norman transformed it into the beautiful space it is on the right. But why am I talking about this here? Because a bunch of crazy people about 25 years ago were doing some work trying to understand, well, let's try and cross this road here, but it's full of buses. There's a pedestrian crossing where human beings are treated like cattle. And then a bunch of individuals there on the right-hand side standing in the most dangerous part. And, who's that? Norman, right? Now, this is significant here because the reason this group, Tim, were you there in that group? Yes, he was Tim, the man with hair at the back was Tim. Why is this important? It links to the key issues that you've been learning all year here at the NFI. Is that actually they were crossing the road to understand why is it that everyone wanted to get to that point where they were standing? And why weren't they in the middle of Trafalgar Square? And the reason is this diagram. Diagrams are very powerful, as we saw in the presentations earlier. And this diagram basically says if you're in the middle of the square, in yellow, right, which is the second diagram, the one in the middle, you would see very little. That's the cone of vision. If instead you cross the road dangerously, you see everything. You see all the way down to Big Ben, you see the Buckingham Palace. So it becomes a point not just of the view, and the view of beauty, Edgar, very importantly, as you said, but it also connects you to the rest of the city. And this issue of connection is such a key theme that you've talked about in your three presentations. And a lot of work was done. In fact, with the group that Tim then developed further, I was lucky enough to study under the great Bill Hillier, a friend of ours and mentor in many, many ways. But you can just see there that the mathematics, let's call it, the modeling, the data was the basis. And Norman will confirm this. If he didn't have that data, he would have never got planning permission. So what I've seen from your presentations today in the three cities, San Marino, Athens, and Bilbao, is this ability to use data in order to affect change in a positive way. And it does go back to this project, where on the left-hand side, what was mapped were where people actually were sitting. In blue is where people were moving, and that led to this massive change in terms of the lifeblood, literally the heart of London. And now it's used for everything, from demonstrations to commemorations. It's become a people place. So data linking, Edgar said it more elegantly than I did, to the soul of the city. And interestingly, Norman, I did find this picture, I had to show it, because this doesn't happen just in isolation as a profession of designers. This was a picture taken way back in a series of public debates that were organized at the time. And you'll see who was sitting in the front row. I mean, sort of not unlike here, right now. It was Norman, Pascal Maragall, the then mayor of Barcelona, a chap called Tony Blair, who was at that point the leader of the Labour Party in opposition, and close friend Richard Rogers, who I'll come back to in a moment. This ability and need to communicate, to convene, I think is probably the best word here, is another part, critical part of what all of you have been learning without even thinking about it. I mean, the fact that you have this faculty here, you have the mayors, you have the city leaders from Athens who are making decisions, you have San Marino represented, is one of the most important things you've been offered, because I can assure you that does not happen in a normal school of architecture. That does not happen in a normal school of planning, and it certainly doesn't happen in a normal school of urban sociology, whatever that is. Now, I think what is important here is to think back at what Norman and Elena invented, and this was your key phrase, that the mission is preparing civic leaders for the future. In this case, these 3 years, and I know that Kent, Edgar, and everyone else here was involved in the thinking through. And I would say if I want to isolate some of the 4 big things, and the interdisciplinarity has already been mentioned is really essential here. These 4 things, the connection between urban design, physical, with social equity, with environmental issues, and with governance, are really something unique that cuts across here. I, yes, run a program at the London School of Economics. We don't do design. We pretend we do. We don't really do design. Here you do design, and I think that's very important. I just want to focus, because of time, on the 2 issues of equity and governance. And in fact, I would reframe your mission statement and say that you're actually shaping a new generation of city makers. And why I say that is that you make and shape cities both in the physicality but also in the way it's governed. Who makes the decisions? How? And I think that is absolutely instrumental in what you said. Now, is there an urgency on getting it right? The Cairo experience of Edgar, puts it right in our face. These are the cities that are growing fastest. Maybe many of you may have seen this image before, but that number represents a number of people moving into those cities per hour, right, per hour. Now, I know that many of you, having met you, the graduates, the scholars, the graduands, actually represent some of these cities here. And when you have 1.5 people per minute moving into a city like Lagos, Dhaka, whatever, how do you design housing? How do you design infrastructure? But more importantly, who decides? And I think what you're learning here is who to talk to, at what level, and how to bring data, of course, together. Now, some people have done this before. And this is Norman with his close friend, who unfortunately is no longer with us, Richard Rogers, who were at Yale together as master's students. I'm pausing here because it's so important, the bond that you create between yourselves, that it lasts a lifetime. It can be transformative in more ways than once, not just in terms of personal friendships, but if you have a belief in something, which clearly here there is a belief in the future of equitable cities, this is what drove these 2 gentlemen all their careers. Norman, as you notice, has really slowed down a lot recently, so, not doing very much. But it is important that these ideas, and one of the phrases that Richard used very often was, cities can either humanize or brutalize, is exactly in your hands, your generation. You can make decisions, say, in the middle of London, to either create an environment which Norman does actually bring people together and create active shops. There are exceptions to the rule. Or you can brutalize cities by just not letting developers do what the hell they want and not really think about the DNA of the city as it is. There are other examples. The one on the left I don't think I need to talk about. But it's a decision made by a mayor, of course, but made by a designer about the public realm of the city. But on the right-hand side, for me, is one of the most bracing images I know. I took it in a new part of Mumbai, only about 10 years ago, and it was a relocation of street sellers who were moved to a better environment. Not only did they lose their trade, because there was no passing by, they lost everything. They couldn't afford to actually pay for the electricity for the lifts, so they just threw rubbish in the lift shafts. It became a slum, vertical slum rather than horizontal slum. In other words, we can do things without knowing which actually brutalized the human condition in cities. And you've been provided with the tools to avoid that, right? That's exactly what you've been going through in these 9 months, and it's exactly what you're going to be going through in the next, or using in the next 20, 30 years. I think one way of summarizing it is you've learned the tools to capture the spatial, the social, and the political DNA of cities. Now, some of us were brought up with these diagrams way back, but for 300 years, not only just my generation. But even a map like this, it happens to be of Rome in the 18th century, makes you understand that the connections between the white spaces are what brings us together. It's the public realm. We've sort of forgotten that in the last 50 years, right? If I hear the story of New Cairo, I think, Edgar, it's, it don't look like this, right? But it's important in terms of what the tools you've learned is that it's not just the structure of space, but it's the structure of society. And how the two actually come together is what enriches our knowledge and improves our practice. This is an extraordinary map drawn by a man called Charles Booth in the 1880s of the whole of London, which was then the Lagos of the world, right? It was the fastest growing city by far, right? And what he did is he was simply in gold drew where the rich people live, in red where the middle class, and then all the way down to the black where the poor and the vicious and the criminals lived, right? It's the connection between these two diagrams and how you move forward to contemporary ways of understanding the city. This is the space syntax model that you all know so well, which really empowers you to move forward and do something like this. What is this? This is, and I saw a few of these diagrams earlier, it's a map on the left of where people are most deprived, as it happens, in London. It could be Paris, it could be Bilbao, it could be Barcelona, it could be Madrid. Every city has a different pattern, a different DNA. The problem with London is that the poverty is concentrated in the east, full stop. And wealth is on the edges, on the west. So the planning policy there for the last 10, 15 years, I would say, Olympics included, is to shift the emphasis, and you see it on the diagram on the right, towards more investment, more housing, better public services, better transport infrastructure over there. Now, you might say, duh. Isn't that obvious? Isn't that what every city should do? And I think most of us involved in city making know that that's not what happens. Land ownership, corruption, and many other things get in the way. So I think you're really trained to be able to do something of that sort and to talk to these guys, right? I've put a question mark on the right-hand side for those of you who are in New York, just in case I get this wrong on the day that I give the speech. But these three gentlemen, the one on the left, I think we are formidably impressed by what he was able to do in 3 terms, have transformed the life of people, not just by changing the way, how long they live. I can never remember whether New Yorkers now live 4 or 3 years longer because of the absence of smoking, which Michael Bloomberg, it's an extraordinary number in a very short, how many years is it? 3 years. And we also know that you can have a mayor that nothing happens. And we don't know what's going to happen next. But I think in terms of the issues at the NFI, the skills that you are learning is that you can talk to these people. And I stress that most generations of architects, planners, etc., are not trained to do that. So the conversation, as I say, is just as important. But also understanding power. In the end, where people make decisions, where you can have influence, also depends on who you're talking to and what power they have. On the left, you see London in green, where the boundary of the mayor is. And you see that most people, 9 million or so, live in that area. That's people vote. They like him, they don't like him, kick him out, whatever. In the case of New York City, it's really quite different. You actually have many people living outside, and the powers, to go back to that key point, is actually, in some cases, save for major transport infrastructure, up the scale in yellow. What these colors just show, blue is central government, red is the mayor, green is community, And that's London on the left, and on the right, you have the state of New York, or the state of Mexico. And it's because of the intervention of the state that one of the best ideas from any city to improve life, congestion charge, was totally blocked overnight by the governor, not elected by New Yorkers, but by the state. Now, this is significant because for you, it is a question of who do you talk to? How do you use your skills? At what level do you actually engage? And again, I really feel coming out of this program, you have those insights in front of you. Now, let me begin to conclude by saying, what is it that I would say, it's been covered by others already, that really stands out in terms of what is being offered and actually what you've learned? I mean, the fact that you've used data to understand urban systems, I stress, is unique, and you're pioneers. You're out there, you're pioneers. Not many others can do that. We must not forget imagination. It's not automatic. If you press those buttons in the Bilbao booster, it doesn't necessarily create something beautiful, but it creates the context to then create something beautiful in the right place. And I think that's exactly the sort of tools that you've been able to. That you're creating solutions that not only help, let's call it equitable society, but clearly have impacts on the environment and on the health of the planet. But I think this term, which I learned really from Edgar, not only do you develop the skills, but you have the agency, which is waking up in the morning and saying, I want to do this. I'm not going to just leave my city to go down the hill or whatever, or I'm going to move to another department. You have the agency to become what I would call a city maker. I talked to some of you, many of you actually, when I was here for a very short time, but it was very, very clear to me what you'd learned, what you said to me. You all felt you have a different way of thinking about cities from when you arrived, right? That's credit to your tutors, I've got to say. I think you felt that it was absolutely invaluable to have this interdisciplinary experience, right? You're not working in silos. Importance of listening, maybe some more than others, not sure. We'll talk to the tutors later. To use data, of course, to develop a line, but also to test ideas, but also understand that cities are not simple things. They're incredibly complex, incredibly layered, and you've got to make decisions as to what's more important. And I think this last point is very significant. To understand, you're beginning to understand, and you can act because of the understanding the power of leadership and good governance. So I think, to those of you who've run the program, it's been a pedagogic success. So well done to the front line. Okay, let's end with, being sort of in a good mood. Not that, Edgar, you brought us down, because you've got to remember one thing. There'll be no one like you ever again. You're the first class. There's no one will ever be like you. You'll all be talking to each other. Remember, we were in that room, and there'll be people 3 years down the line. James Anderson organized an event with mayors from different cohorts of the Harvard program for mayors, and it was interesting. The first year definitely felt superior, right? Now, maybe they were good or not as good, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you are the first year, you're the seeds of a global family, a global network that will never recede. It's very clear that it will only continue. As we saw with Norman and Richard and many others, you're forging connections. The person next to you, the person behind you, you're forging connections that are life-lasting, but life-transforming, and most importantly, city-transforming. You're going to be ambassadors, and you are agents of urban change. Congratulations. Congratulations to all of you. I'm going to take one extra moment because I went through a slide that I shouldn't have gone through because it had a list of people to thank. The tutors, the young tutors who've been living this are just extraordinary. So thank you for that. I mean, really amazing work that you put in. So an applause to them, I think. the list of sponsors, donors, and staff I don't need to say, but there are two people who sort of matter, Norman and Elena. Thank you.